Okay, looks like everybody's in. 451 people, 52.
Hi, everyone.
Right.
Just wait for a few more people to join.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Hi, Lydia.
Okay. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Hi, yeah, please use the chat and say hello. I'm Alice from Macmillan, and I'd like to welcome Judith John, who's going to be doing the webinar today. Hope some of you may have met her before. She's been in Belize and obviously one of the authors of the My BZ Language Tree series. So very excited for her to share everything that you need to know for the middle division books today. And we've also got Chris here as well. So he's going to support with any, Judith, with any questions you might have. And yeah, just put anything in the chat that you'd like to know throughout the webinar. So Judith, I'll pass over to you.
Great.
I know you're going to be sharing your screen as well. I'll make sure everyone can see you spotlight your screen.
Okay, I'll start the share.
Great.
Okay. Everything's
And
in
I'll
order.
just start the PowerPoint off. How's that?
Yeah, great. We can see that.
Yep.
So, hi, everyone. Wonderful to be here with you this evening for me, this afternoon for you. My name's Judith. I joined the Macmillan team for language arts in 2024, joining Leonie Bennett and Julia Sander, the original authors. I originally taught English in the UK and began working in educational publishing in about 2011. And now I work mainly as a writer, trainer and editor on a freelance basis. I've known Julia Sander for about 10 years now. We worked on lots of projects together, and I've worked with Leonie Bennett just once or twice before. This is the main one with her. But they were very welcoming and positive about me joining the team to support them with the adaptation of language arts to make it more appropriate for Belize and fulfill the needs of the new Belize curriculum. So I've now worked on the teacher guides for the lower division and the middle division. I'll be starting the upper division ones in a few months when I come back from the middle division workshop that's in March. And I've also updated some of the middle and upper division student books and workbooks, partly because Leonie needed to take a bit of a step back from the project. So Julia and I came out last May to deliver a lower division workshop, which was really, really useful for me and positive, and I learned a lot. Hopefully I taught a few things too. And I'll be coming back out in March, as I mentioned, from the 10th of March to the 17th to run a workshop for middle division teachers. So I'd love to see as many of you as possible there. So the aims of this workshop, can I just very quickly hold up the actual books for you? I meant to mention at the start, here they are. I hope you can see them. There's nothing like holding the actual books in your hands. If you don't already have these, we do believe they're in Belize now. It just might be that they haven't been distributed to you at your schools yet, but we're really hoping that'll happen very soon for you. And that will be the student books and workbooks, and the teacher guides are available on your TLI platform. So today's session, we have three main aims: that you better understand the main updates to the My BZ Language Tree series, that you understand how the revised My BZ Language Tree books help you deliver the competency-based curriculum, and how that know that you're able to use the My BZ Language Tree textbooks to deliver the full Belizean curriculum in the classroom. So there's quite a few new features that I'll go through, and we're going to stop about halfway through, and there'll be time for questions then based on the new features, which we'll start with the main updates. And then we'll go through the competencies in turn in a bit more detail and have a bit more time for questions at the end. Just so you know, I can't see the chat that's happening now, but please add your name, say hi, maybe where you're from, and please add any questions you have as you go. But what I'll do is I'll stop at certain times and I'll look through it and answer them, as many as possible. And Chris is on hand. He'll give me a shout out if there's anything he thinks I need to pick up on straight away. So to get started, next slide, we'll start with the new features. So I'll go through this list just briefly for you. There are actually several key ways where the series has been updated, and some of these are listed here. So to start introducing you to these features, we've adapted for the new competency-based curriculum. The student books and workbooks have been checked and revised so that we know we're happy that all of the learning objectives specified in the new curriculum are covered. Because we were asked not to do a complete revision of the books, you'll also have some other content that might not be a learning objective for a certain standard in the curriculum. However, we agreed not to remove this content just to make sure that everything that needed to be covered was covered. These new books have an increased emphasis on speaking and listening, which when the books were first produced wasn't a skill that was produced in every unit. We've got some listening text to be read by the teacher, and very excitingly, I think, we've got audios of these available online that we've had recorded for you. We've got suggestions for transitioning from home language to standard English, and we've got lists of high frequency words provided for the students to learn. These were in the lower division books, and they're in standards 2 and 3 for the middle division, not standard 4 because it isn't a requirement of the curriculum for that level. So we'll now look at some of these in a bit more detail. I know I've got a lot on some of these slides, just to mention that, and just to say, I do hope you can see it quite clearly. If you can't, obviously you'll have this webinar, a recording of this webinar, I believe, to refer to later. And also you'll obviously have the books very soon that you can refer to. So I've mentioned page numbers and references where I think they'd be useful. So what we've got here is an example of a speaking and listening task from standard 2. On the left-hand side, you can see the task as it is in the student book with the green and the little icons down the side. The red-looking icon is the one for teacher talk, and these are used to show you where there are accompanying listening texts at the end of the book. So I'd just like to try this. I think you'll see this on your screen possibly, but what you'll hear or what you'll be able to play for your students is like this.
Judith, I'm not hearing it.
You can't hear it?
This one, maybe you need to share with audio as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I'll come back to that then, because I don't want to stop and start fiddling around and stop sharing. So I'll come back to that and we'll try that maybe while you're putting maybe questions in the chat in a bit later. I'll try and work out how to play it for you again. So sorry about that.
Yes, no problem.
As the backup, the text is luckily provided on the right-hand side of your screen. This is from the back of the student book, and all of the listening text audios are presented for you in the back of the book if you'd prefer to use them that way. I would say I found this very easy to download and put on my laptop as a MP3 file. So I'm hoping it would be equally easy for you to use on a mobile phone if you had to in the classroom. Obviously not through a Teams PowerPoint though. So just to go through the task very briefly, the task involves a teacher sharing the audio which the students will then discuss, answer questions on, or do various other things with. And at the back of the book, for some of the speaking and listening, or for some of the audio, sorry, these notes in italics here at the start and at the end of the text give you a bit more teaching information that you might be able to use in the classroom. So we'll try the audio again later, if that's okay. So next thing I wanted to mention, the transition from home language to standard English. So it's a thing that is an important skill for students. We did want to make clear with this, while we're giving these examples of how students can use and transition from using standard English to, transition from their home language to standard English, we do want to make it clear that home languages are equally valued, and there are times when using the home language is preferable and when using standard English is preferable. So what we're working towards here is where students are increasingly able to switch between the two as the need arises. So I've got a few examples for you here. The very top note shows you how the home language icon appears throughout the book. It's from the introduction. And the other three sections in the slight orange background are teacher notes that you'll see on the pages of your student book. And the home language icon there gives you this an easy spot to find it. So the top one, for example, is from Standard 2, and it relates to retelling familiar or traditional tales, starting with reading them in the home language, and then perhaps reading a story again in Standard English. If you wanted to then, you could pick up some differences between home language words or sentence structure between the home language and Standard English. The second one is from Standard 3, quite a different example here. The focus here, this is from language, from singular and plural nouns. So this draws attention to possible differences in grammar and sentence structure between the home languages and Standard English, such as when to use the singular or plural nouns. And then the last one's from Standard 4, and it's more related to group discussions here. So the group discussion could be held in a home language, but then students would be asked to report to the class using Standard English. So I suspect many of these are things you already do in the classroom, but these help some teachers make this more explicit in their teaching. And again, pointing out which form of language is more appropriate for each situation and transitioning and helping students transition from one to the other. And next slide. This is just a quick example I wanted to show you of the high frequency words lists that you'll see in the back of Standard 2 and Standard 3. For each unit, if you can make that out, where there's a list of words that are frequently used and that might be related to the themes of the unit that we suggest students become familiar with. And there are some notes on the on-page teacher guides, teacher notes for you that suggest these words are used regularly and practiced regularly. More new features for you. This list, for me, some of the, obviously we have to update the book for the new curriculum, but for me, these are really essential because I feel that these make the books more relevant to students, which is great. So the texts have been updated to include more contemporary themes, such as environmental issues and changes to information technology, which can appear really dated quickly and easily in textbooks. We wanted to include more texts that were relevant to Belize and include and update the artwork and photos in the books so that they better reflect the different ethnicities in Belize. We wanted to give guidance on how to cover the competencies using the language tree activities. So later I'll show you how those are in the on-page teacher notes. And then in the second half of this seminar, we'll use actual activities from the books to go through these. There are Now I Can pages at the end of every unit, and these give regular opportunities for formative assessment. So they cover the key skills and learning objectives of the units. And what we would like from this is them to be used as a guidance for you as teachers to say, our class needs to practice, for example, plural nouns a bit more, so you'd be able to pick up on that in later teaching. And there are full online teacher guides for every level, which I'll go through shortly. So just to show you a few examples of environmental topics. From the one on the left is from Standard 3 and the one on the right is from Standard 4. And what we're aiming to do with this content is get students thinking about how we're all across the world responsible for our environment and caring for it. So anyone who perhaps threw away a plastic bottle becomes aware that it would take up to 1,000 years to decompose, which is quite an incredible fact. And really from that, how we can all make a difference if we work together, both in bad ways and in good ways, like by not putting rubbish in the right bins or by making a difference through recycling. And the one on the right is more specific to Belize, equally important here, talking about the reef, how to protect it, do's and don'ts that might be more relevant to students' lives and make it a bit more applicable to them. We've also got links to competency 7 on sustainable human development, and you may also be able to make some cross-curricular links with other topics, which is a nice way of delivering the environmental topics. Some ideas about information technology have been embedded throughout the books. The blue icons you can see there are how these are shown in the introduction in the student's book, just to show you what these symbols mean and how they can be found in the books and what they're for. The one on the top right, as you see it, the little tablet, type your letter, revise it using the cut and paste features, isn't one of those examples of an IT tip, for the student. And the bottom one is one of the teacher notes, and that's aimed for the teachers. So allow students to access the internet to research their questions if possible. What we're aiming for with these is, because we can't assume a certain level of technology in classrooms or schools or districts, we're presenting these more as suggestions. They could be used if possible to enhance learning. However, equally, they could be left out if necessarily without there being a negative impact on the learning. I know it's another bit, quite a full slide for you, sorry. But this one's looking at the competencies. I wanted to show you these in the context of the other teaching notes on the page. And as I said, we'll look at examples from the student book activities later. But I wanted to point out how the competencies are already embedded in the language arts series and can be linked to many of the skills we cover in language arts. So the competencies, if you can read this top one, C1, they are presented as questions. We've done it in this way so that you as a teacher can consider or build upon these questions if you feel it's something your students would benefit from. Or you can rephrase the question and actually ask it of your students if you want them to think about it themselves. So the top example from Standard 3, this is from a reading task. Are students able to appreciate that it is unkind to laugh at people and call them names? This relates to a play about students and how it can be very easy to hurt someone's feelings, perhaps even without meaning to, how this can make other people feel. So a really relatable topic, I'd say, in any school. The next example is from Standard 4. How well do your students work interdependently and contribute to the learning of others? And this focuses on collaboration and is part of the speaking and listening section of the unit. This is set out as a think, pair, share task. So students actually need to work and collaborate in a variety of ways to make a contribution to their own learning and the learning of others. And the final example is from Standard 2. This is competency 3 and it's part of the writing section. Are your students able to generate ideas to create their own stories? And here we focus on how students think innovatively or inventively to create ideas for their own stories. This, I think, is quite a challenging task for a lot of students. So this might be something I'd like to really work on with my class and think about how they're able to generate ideas already and what tips I could give them to help them with this competency. For example, you might involve another competency of collaboration here to allow students to share ideas and get themselves started. Here we have some pages of the Now I Can formative assessments that come at the end of every unit. I wanted to show you two quite different examples. So we've got Unit 1 on the left for you from Standard 2, and on the right we've got the final unit, Unit 18 from Standard 4. So you can see just from looking that they are deliberately designed to be age appropriate. We've got more content in the one from Standard 4 and it's a lot more busy and detailed page. And as I mentioned, these aim to give a formative assessment of students' learning. So you can use them for after that to pick up on areas where students need more help. Importantly, I think from these, you've got this in the teacher notes at the bottom of many of these Now I Can pages, a link to something in the back of the book, which is this graphic organizer section that you can see at the bottom of the screen. And these graphic organizers are really useful for students to help assess their own progress and identify their own areas for development. So here we can see the questions: what did I do well? What was difficult? And what do I need to get better at? Which is a great way for students to take control of their own learning and development. Excuse me a moment. So I'm going to go on to look in a bit more detail at some of the online teachers' guides. I'll go through a few more slides and show you some examples of the kind of content that we have in the teacher guides. And then we'll stop and I'll look through the chat for questions and we'll have some time to discuss any of the new features you have questions about. So the online teacher guides are on the TLI for you, are available for both the lower division and the middle division grades. And they're designed to support you in delivering the content of the curriculum through the student books and workbooks. And the series has been designed as a 3-part series that you can use each of the 3 books together to hopefully give you the fullest and most detailed way of delivering the student book and workbook activities. You don't have to use the teacher guides if you prefer not to, but I do recommend you go in and take a look at them, because you might find there's some useful content, even if it's just answers to the questions, to save yourself a bit of time in your teaching. If any of you used the teacher guides for language arts in the past, I think they were available for some of the previous editions, but I'm not sure how popular they've been in recent years, or how well used they've been, I should say, in recent years. So, but if you have used them, you'll be quite familiar with the overall content. So we've kept to a similar approach, because what was in there worked really well, and teachers were fond of and found what was in them very useful. So these contain teacher notes for all the student book content in order, and we've stuck to this, but we've updated it to reflect the new features and the updates to the curriculum. So to start with, what you can see on your screen, there's an updated introduction in the teacher guide, which will give you more information on the series and explain more about the new or updated features. This introduction includes a scope and sequence chart, which is at the front of each book. This complements the scope and sequence in the student's book you'll see in the front of your students' books when you get them. But it also includes the outcome codes from the Belize curriculum, so that you can easily cross-reference coverage of these outcomes and which unit they're covered in. And then, as it says, each unit includes a list of outcomes, links to key competencies, a mapping table with suggestions on when and how to deliver content, all about the answers to student book and workbook questions, and answers to the Now I Can pages. And there are separate online tests available for each unit, I think also on the TLI, and the answers to these questions are provided at the end of every unit in the teacher guides. So I'll just briefly go through some of the content of the teacher guide units for you. And again, I'm sorry if you can't see or read too much of this, but I wanted to just introduce these for you and start getting you familiar with how the units work and how they're laid out. So each teacher guide unit opens like this, with page number cross-references to the relevant student book and workbook pages, which you'll be able to see under the top of the example of Unit 4 here. After that, as you can see, there's a list of outcomes in the order they are covered in the student book. And then we've got the main competencies listed for each of the units, and a bit of information that shows the focus of that competency. So, for example, the top competency for appreciation of the sacred nature of the human person and character development. Here, the focus is on developing characters by reading stories with moral lessons and having students apply these to their own lives. Next, in the units, for every unit, we provide a mapping table, which with suggested, as it says, time allocation for you to deliver the student book and workbook content. These are generally in middle division set out as 2-week tables, assuming you'll take 2 weeks to deliver each of the 18 units, excuse me. This is a new feature. It does assume there's one language arts lesson a day, and obviously 5 days of the week. And they give brief suggestions on what student book and workbook to cover in each lesson. And they worked with the units in the order that the contents are presented in the student books. So hopefully they'll give you a good idea of how to set the unit out over a 2-week period of teaching. A very common request we got from lots of teachers when we started researching how to best update these books was that it would be useful to have suggestions on where to cover workbook content. Currently, the workbooks are set out in skills sections of comprehension, language, word work and writing and so on, rather than in a unit by unit approach. So we've stuck to this for the new series. So what we've done is added suggestions to these tables on where you might want to cover specific workbook pages. I don't think you can make any of these out, but if you go through one in more detail, you'll be able to see examples. And we're hoping here that this will save you time that you might have spent going through the workbooks yourself to find the most relevant content to support the student book. If you can see, there's some bold print on these. So in the third column of the top section, lesson 3, the third point mentions an additional skills practice. This is a new feature for middle division, just to give you a bit more extra content if you need it, completely optional, but they were designed to be a little more active rather than just using your workbooks as text-based content if you wanted something different or additional. So these tables are completely optional. Obviously, there might be differences between schools on how you're teaching of language arts. So you don't need to follow these. In fact, if you've been using Language Tree for many years and are very happy with it, you may just want to dip in for ideas now and again for the new content. But if you're new for teaching, or if you're new to using Language Tree, they could be a good starting point for you to support your own planning. But feel free to treat these as completely optional and adapt these as best you need to for your own classrooms. So this is followed in each unit, but we go through each of the skills in turn. So we usually start with reading. What we have then are teacher notes. These bullet point lists are teacher notes for you that support every section of every content in the student books. As you'll probably be aware, in the student books already, there are some teacher notes on the pages of the student books. So you've already got some support there. But these teacher guides provide further suggestions if and when they are needed that complement those on-page notes. The bullet points work through the student book content and exercises. They give suggestions on ways of delivering the material or delivering any additional activities or questions you might want to ask. If you can read the top few bullet points, for example, we have before reading, during reading, and after reading suggestions here. So it's quite a useful approach, I think. And the box, you can see the extension box. There are regular support and extension boxes, which you can use as appropriate to tailor the content to your specific students and classes. So as an example for support, you might have a group of students might be allowed to work on a reduced section of an exercise, for example. They might be able to answer orally rather than in writing. And for extension, as you can see, volunteers may be able to read out some dialogue, or students might be able to provide additional answers, or they might need to be asked to write a response as a paragraph rather than just a few sentences. So again, these are optional for you to use as you want. The competencies that you saw earlier flagged for each of the units and that are flagged in the student book teacher notes are here. Hopefully you can see this small C1 icon in about the middle of the page. For example, here, the on-page teacher note in the student book asks the question about drawing moral lessons from stories that I mentioned earlier. And here in the teacher guide, we expand on this by asking students about the main character of the story and how they were impacted by what they learned in the story. This is then related to students and what they might learn themselves from the story and how it could apply to their own lives. You could possibly expand on this further to cover issues that might relate to your students, such as treating others as you would want to be treated. And lastly, at the bottom of the page in italics, which I always used to find very useful as a teacher, there's the answer section. And this sets out all the answers to the exercises in the student books. If you can see the very bottom of the page, the answer to question 8 says students' own answers. And this is what we've put where we don't want to limit students' answers. We want them to be as creative as they can. So we've not given possible answers to open questions. And this comes then towards the end of the unit. And this is where we give you some teaching guidance and the answers for the workbook content that we suggest you deliver as part of each unit. So here you can see some teacher notes, the bullet pointed teacher notes, just as you would for the student book. And then there are answers to that same worksheet. In addition to this, at the end of every unit, there is some support for the Now I Can pages in the student book. There are a few additional teaching suggestions or notes and the answers to the exercises. There are also separate online tests for each unit, and the answers for these can be given in the teacher guide too. So there's lots of material in here that hopefully you'll find useful, or even if you dip in and out, it's totally up to you. But do have a look at these, I'd recommend, because they're a good feature, a good resource for you that hopefully will save you time in your teaching. So I've talked a lot at you this past half hour. We're going to take a short break now while I look through the chat and see if you've got any questions for me on the new features before we go on to look at the competencies in more detail. So I'll just bring up the chat feature, if you bear with me, which may cover part of the screen now. And I'll just have a little look through this and see if there's any questions. But if you do have anything on the new features, please add it to the chat now.
Judith, I'll just mention briefly that one of the questions that was asked is if you could remind just for the people, I guess, that arrived a little late, you could mention where they can find the teacher guides.
Okay, yeah, thank you. The teacher guides are available on the TLI platform that the Belize Ministry set up for you. I'm afraid I haven't been able to access that, so I can't give you much more information. But if you have a check on that platform, or if you're not able to access that, I'd recommend asking perhaps your principal so that they can make sure you've got access, or they can get you access if you don't have it. Chris, if you can add to that, please do, from your knowledge. And just flicking through the questions, the list of it's really nice to see lots of people. Welcome. Let's have a look. So bear with me just for a few moments.
So more recent, if you can go, you can probably go through to the end, Judith.
Yeah.
Those are where most of the questions were.
Oh, okay, thanks, Chris.
Are at the moment. Yeah. To the newer messages.
Just flicking, I think there's lots of people, so it keeps uploading. I'm sorry, some of you have had a bit of trouble with no audio.
Yes. I think the audio has been working fine for me and a few other guests. So
that's good.
Maybe
hopefully
somebody suggested maybe just speak a little bit louder if you can.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll turn my sound up. Okay. Yeah, the online tests for each unit, again, I'm sorry, they are on the TLI and I can't be more specific about where they are. So if you maybe just go on and have a look, and again, maybe ask your principal, but I'll make a note of this and try and get a more useful answer and see if we can get that shared. So thank you for that. Okay, oops, just go back there. Oh. Right. Please tell me more about the QR code found in your book. Thank you for that question. The QR code, as I understand it, can be used to access the MME, which is the Macmillan Education portal. So if you use your QR code and follow, I think there's a link also that'll take you onto the Macmillan site. That's where you can find some other resources. I think actually, because we're producing this series new, you'll get these as classroom resources too. So hopefully some posters you'll be able to put up. But they're also available on the Macmillan site for you. And there are some additional online activities. However, these haven't yet been tailored to the new updates that we've done for the Belize version of the language arts series. So they may still be useful to you, but they won't be based on the new books that you'll be getting or you've already recently got. So that's what the QR code is for. And it's well worth having a look at, I think. Thank you. Is it Elio? Is there any assessment that comes with the teacher's guide? So mainly in the teacher's guide, we support the assessment that's already in the student book in terms of the Now I Can pages. And we're expecting those to be used in more of a formative assessment kind of way to see how students are progressing. What you could do with the tests that support each unit that are on the TLI is later on you could use those tests as a slightly more summative approach if you wanted, because they assess the same skills from their Now I Can for every unit, but they do it just in a slightly different way with different questions. So that could be a good way of you using one assessment, the one in the student book, the Now I Can, in a more formative way, then picking up any areas your class or your students were struggling with. Then later on, you could use the test as a way of assessing how well they've built on their skills for that. We don't have any separate assessment in the teacher's guide Again, if you look on the Macmillan Education platform through the QR code in the books, possibly some of the online resources there might be able to help you. But again, they're not tailored completely for this new series of the books. But it might be well worth having a look. If you find you need more assessment material, you could find more on there. Okay, just carrying on. Okay, I think I'm at the end of the chat, so thank you for your questions. If there's anything else you think of while we go through the competency section, just add it in, and I'll do the same again at the end. I'll bring the chat up and have a look at it and answer as much as the questions as I can for you. Right, just a quick drink before we carry on. Sorry if I'm a little hard to hear or understand. I'll slow down a bit too in my talking. All right, Chris, did you pick up anything I missed?
No, those were most of the questions that were asked.
Okay, thank you.
I will keep on monitoring, and then if I see any, I will let you know.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, everyone. So I'll minimize the chat now, so you can see the next slide, and this is taking us to the next sort of half or section of the webinar, which is going to focus on the competency aspect of the new curriculum and go through each of the competencies in a bit more detail. So as you know, one of the major changes to the new curriculum is that it follows a competency-based approach. So for language arts, this means as well as teaching the subject skills or the curriculum areas of reading fluency and accuracy, comprehension, production, language structure, we also need to build in teaching of the 7 competencies in order to provide a more holistic approach to our students' education. So I thought of 2 questions that I would want to ask myself as a teacher when given a competency-based curriculum as opposed to a purely skills-based curriculum. So the first one I would ask is why? What are the benefits of following a competency-based curriculum? And in answer to that, obviously, it's a requirement now of the new curriculum, so we need to follow it. However, I do believe there are many benefits to this approach, and I hope I'll be able to show some of these as we talk. And for me, the main aim of this type of curriculum is that you're not just giving your students the skills they need to read or write or pass tests. So we're not just talking about academic skills here. We're also aiming to equip students to leave school with the ability to be proficient in these competencies. Another way you might describe as life skills. When I started teaching, I started reflecting on this curriculum. When I started teaching, a popular approach then was called learning to learn. And I remember that there were quite similarities between the approaches here, especially with some of the competencies like emotional intelligence or critical thinking or collaboration, which were a big part of learning to learn. And I liked that we had to embed these learning to learn features in our teaching, even though I found it difficult at the start. But what it meant for me, looking back on it and reflecting after a few years of doing this, was that by following what I called learning to learn and what we're calling the competency-based curriculum, was that I was equipping my students to be proficient in the subject, but also to help them become global citizens who would want to go out into the world and work with others and empathize with other people, who were able to solve problems and who wanted to contribute positively to society. So I think it's a really valuable thing to do. However, it's also a very big responsibility for teachers. So we're going to break it down and discuss it in more detail. And that's when I thought about the second question, how can I deliver a competency-based curriculum? And in some ways, I think it's probably easier to deliver the competencies through the subject of language arts than it is through other subjects, because so many of the competencies are naturally taught and used in language arts. We just haven't been calling them competencies. At the lower division then, we began this process in the books, and you did with your curriculum, of delivering the competencies in an introductory way. So now we're at the middle division. We need to start expecting our students to be familiar with these competencies and hoping that they develop their understanding of them before they go on to achieve them and hopefully master them by their end of the education. But of course, it doesn't end there. We want them to be able to take them forward into their lives just with any skill that you would teach them. What you introduced here will be reinforced and built upon as students move up through their curriculum. So it's not just that you have to teach a competency and that's it. We're teaching elements of different competencies throughout our language arts curriculum, and we're building on these as we carry on. In the student book introduction, we mentioned that some of the competencies are really embedded in, we think, in all the units throughout the language arts series. So the competencies of emotional intelligence and communication, critical and innovative inventive thinking, and collaboration are ones we feel are already strongly in place within the language arts series. So even though the books were written before the competency-based curriculum, they are present throughout the series, and they are competencies that our students will use in most of the lessons. So for example, if we consider how we ask students to work in pairs or groups, or have discussions, or form opinions of characters and share these, and learn a lesson from a story, as we looked at earlier, all of these activities work towards one or more of the competencies, and they are already well integrated into the language arts textbooks. So in a way, we're already delivering these competencies. We just need to make it explicit, more explicit to our students. Some of the competencies are covered less frequently, mainly because they're more related to unit themes, such as perhaps sustainable development, but they are all present in the books, and we've tried hard to draw them out and make them explicit for you. And for me, the more I look at or think about the individual competencies, the more I can see that they're naturally embedded into the skills of this subject, even if they weren't originally referred to or taught as competencies. So I think for delivering this curriculum, what we need to think about is our approach to how we teach or make explicit each competency that will be different. And that's what I'll hopefully be demonstrating when we look at the competencies in more detail. I also, though, as an ex-teacher, I wanted to think about the competencies in my own life. I like to think of myself as someone who's always learning. I don't want to ever stop learning, because I think it's the most valuable thing a human can do. And so Alice and I, when we were preparing for this call, Alice Laver at Macmillan and I, we usually use Zoom for these calls, and we know what we're doing with Zoom. And for example, I could have had the chat up as well as being able to see the screen. All I can see is the PowerPoint on both of my screens. So I can't see myself and I can't see the chat, which is a shame. We tried to arrange to make it work. So we collaborated together. We had some difficulties we needed to overcome, and we shared different techniques for these. In the end, we found out why we can't make it work, but not how to actually solve the problem. So I learned something new about digital technology, even though it wasn't as much as I was hoping. And I had an example of how I collaborated. And it's not the best example, maybe, because it didn't quite work for the digital technology, but what this goes to show is that we're all using the competencies in our daily lives. And I think by modeling these and making them explicit to our students, how we use them in our lives, they can also learn from our approach, which is a very important tool, I think. So I'm going to stop again just shortly before going on. What I'd like you to think about, and I'd love it if you could put some ideas in the chat of this, is what did you do recently that involved one or more of the competencies? So I'd like you to think about your day in the classroom. Maybe you feel you used a competency of emotional intelligence while dealing with a student or maybe a problem, or in your everyday lives. So if you can think of any examples using one of or more of the competencies that you used in your daily life recently, please put it into the chat and we'll share some ideas. So I'll bring up the chat again and see if anyone wants to give a comment. Just looking through the chat again, I'm very sorry to see there's not enough provision yet. I honestly don't know about sharing PDF files. I'd have to talk to Macmillan about that, but it's possibly something the ministry would need to confirm on too. But we do think, as far as we're aware, the books are in Belize and they are being distributed. So hopefully if you haven't had them yet, they're on their way. Oh, some examples of collaboration, definitely. If anyone could be more explicit in that, that would be great. But thank you, Vero and Magda. Thank you for sharing. Another request for the PDFs. Again, I can't answer that, I'm sorry, but I'll see what I can find out for you. Working in pairs or small groups, yeah, really useful. Self-assessment, that's an interesting one, something we're going to pick up on later. Thanks everyone for putting these comments in. Critical thinking, a great one, especially for writing. Domingo, I had children create a rap on their families. I love that. Thank you. Communication, dependent guided practice. Adrian, that's an interesting one. Independent guided practice. I'd be interested to know more about that and how you did that in the classroom, presuming in the classroom. Thank you. Questioning, excellent technique. If you've got the books, we do set out question types in them to make explicit the different question types, but I find questioning a really interesting one. And just picking up on that, I saw a really interesting seminar recently where teachers were asked to really think about how long they gave their students to answer questions. And it's incredible for me, just in this chat also, how long just a few seconds feel when no one's responding to you. And when teachers gave 10 seconds, 15 seconds, rather than just a few seconds before they prompted students to answer, they got much more cohesive answers, which was really interesting. Patricia, thank you. Comparing prices at different stores to decide where to buy, to keep within budget problem solving. Great one. Magda, I always have children respect when others speak, and the ideas shared are to be respected. Thanks. That's actually something we'll pick up later. So it's really interesting to hear. Thank you. Okay. I think I'll carry on. Please keep adding these while I talk if anything springs to mind, and I'll come back to this later. But really big thank you for everyone who's contributed. Oh, just one more. Oh, there's a few now. AI, I wondered about talking about AI. But I'd be interested to know what strategies you find helpful, very much so. I have a bit of a fear of it, to be honest. So using it positively and keeping it up to date of it, just as students are, is a great tool. So thank you, Adrian. And Elodia, communication from the poem It Rain, present a problem and have them use clauses to demonstrate punctuating sentences. Thank you. Interesting. These are great. Thank you all so much. So I'll stop it there. Renando, thank you again. Obviously, access to the books is key. This is why we're here. So I will pick up on that and see if I can get any answers for you on when you'll get the books if you don't have them, and the amounts you'll get if you're feeling you don't have enough. I'm going to pause it there. I do see a few other points, and thank you so much for them. But I want to carry on and go through, so I've got time to go through each competency, and then I'll have a bit more time for questions at the end. But thank you very much for all your comments. So I'll pause that. I'll minimize that chat feature for now. So moving on, I've put a slide together for each of the 7 competencies to give you examples of pages or sections from the student books that I think use them and draw them out in different ways, and how I build on these. So it's not just what's in the student books, it's how you might build on them to make it appropriate for your classroom and to develop this competency. So just before we start, we often break down a competency. These are big statements. There's lots involved in these. So we often break them down into more than one part, because at this stage of children's learning and development, it can make things easier, both for them to understand and for you to teach. So for this statement, appreciation of the sacred nature of the human person and character development, we have the statements, students develop an appreciation for each person as special and worthy of respect. Students understand that each person may grow and develop in different, unique ways. So this example is from Standards 2, Unit 12. It's a reading task, and it focuses on the character development part of the competency. I have a really good story here about a boy called George. He's the one in the red t-shirt in the center of the picture. And this is the second part of the story. So before this, we find out that George likes to go to his friend's house to play, but he's not allowed to go there on his own because there are some big busy roads to cross. So his mum always takes him. But one day he's bored, his mum's busy, and George decides to go on his own. So he's on his way. He gets across one road very safely by looking both ways and checking. But then he's distracted by these two boys you can see on the side of the road by the bright green yellow building. They're playing marbles and he wants to join them. So without looking, he rushes across the road. He's almost hit by this van. Thankfully, this man saves him and pulls him to safety. So we've got a really important and relevant lesson here, which is very relatable to students' own lives. And the competency question that you'd see in the teacher notes is what you can see under the statements. So are students able to learn moral lessons from stories and apply them to their own lives? Picking this up again. So we develop on this by the comprehension questions after the story. So some of these ask why George's mother, for example, goes with him in the first place when he visits a friend. So they've got to think about the reason or why George goes with him and why George's mum goes with him and why he shouldn't go on his own. Another question is what George's mother might have to say to him when he gets home or later in the day. So possibly, as my mum would always say, you should always listen to your mother. But more importantly, that there can be serious consequences to being careless around road safety. So it is a really, really important lesson to learn from the story and hopefully to develop people's characters with how they need to be responsible for their own actions. So to further develop this competency, you could perhaps have a discussion on what should happen to George for disobeying his mother. There should be possibly consequences for actions. And it's an interesting way to get students agreeing with this rather than just seeing it from their point of view as someone who's being told off. So from students reflecting on the situation from the point of view of George's mother, as well as him, is a really valuable part of the competency. And so lets them relate to other people and appreciate them as humans. So an idea in the story, a lesson in a story, which was embedded into the story, becomes the basis of students considering how the same lesson can apply to their own lives and what they can learn from this lesson, and hopefully even becoming a bit more mindful about road safety. So a nice one to start with that I think you can do a lot of things with. Based on the competency, based on the lesson of the story, perhaps any cross-curricular links you can make with that. I don't know if cycling proficiency is done in schools, but obviously there's a really good positive link there. And the second competency, emotional intelligence and communication skills. Students understand their own and others' emotions and how they may affect interpersonal relationships. And students effectively communicate in a variety of ways. And this example is from Standard 2, Unit 1, from a speaking and listening activity. And we're focusing here on communication. So just to give you a bit of background from this unit, as you can see, it says, retell the story of the swing. And this story in the reading section is about two brothers who are told not to play on their swing, their garden swing, because the tree it hangs from may have been damaged in a storm. However, the boys do play on the swing despite being told not to, and the branch breaks and the boys fall. Their dad, when he sees the broken swing, asks them if they played on it, and they don't want to get into trouble, so they tell a lie that they saw a monkey swing on the rope and break the branch. Their dad then tells them, unfortunately, a neighbour saw them play on the swing and break it. So we have another lesson with a story, so we can see that we could also pick up competency 1 here. But in this task, the focus is on communication. And if you look at the blue box, that's where this is coming out. So we have the talk together icon, the green icon, and the talk together turtle feature, where students are prompted to take turns when they speak and listen to each other, which was picked up in the chat, and being respectful to each other when we talk, which is brilliant. I like how this draws out part of the communication competency in a very simple, age-appropriate way. But it's very focused, isn't it, on how students can effectively communicate their ideas and how they communicate with others by taking turns and listening. And I think there's lots you can do to develop this. For example, students could assess how well they think they did listen to each other or take turns. And if what they feel they could do differently next time in future speaking and listening, talking activities. So again, another competency that's embedded into the task, but you're able to extract part of that competency, make it explicit, and develop it if you feel your students need to. Excuse me. Just quickly to touch upon something I expect many of you already do, which is how you pair or group students in the classroom. If you've just got a quick task, you may not be happy with them working in friends, which is often when they're most comfortable. However, you might also pair them with people they don't often work with, maybe in mixed ability pairs or groups, to challenge them, but also build on how they can communicate with different people, which is really valuable. Sorry. You could also, just briefly, pick up on the emotional intelligence aspect of the competency here too. These boys did something they were told not to do, and then they made this bad situation worse by not telling the truth about it. So there's also opportunities here for students to put themselves in that situation and share any similar situations they may have been in, how it felt for them, how they think their parents might have felt at the same time of being lied to. So hopefully this gives another example of how a big concept such as emotional intelligence and communication skills can be integrated in a way that makes it accessible to students and teachable within the textbooks. I'm so sorry. Critical and inventive thinking. Students develop their ability to think critically in order to make reasoned judgments or solve problems. And students are able to think creatively and use their imaginations. So again, a big statement here that we've tried to break down slightly for you. This example is from Standard 3, Unit 7. We have another speaking and listening task here. I'd just like to start, though, with picking up at the top of this. Hopefully you can read it. Under the speaking and listening title, it says, Carl said, I don't know what to write. And I can't imagine how many times I've heard that as a teacher in the classroom, and I'm sure it's the same for many of you. And again, this picks up on the reading story where Carl is given a writing task for homework and he doesn't know what to write. And I started thinking that when I've worked with teachers around the world, I would say that this is the skill that probably most of them struggle with, especially teachers in countries who were taught themselves and who still teach in a more teacher-led, didactic kind of way, which doesn't necessarily encourage creativity and imagination in the classroom. It's a hard thing to do. And I know this is speaking and listening, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but when myself, even when I come to write, I can write something in my head very fluently, I think, but then when I come to look at an empty piece of paper, my mind can go blank. So breaking down writing tasks for me is key. And I like that what's introduced in the story is built upon in the speaking and listening task. And we'll come back to this later. So I'll just go back to the speaking and listening here. So Standard 3, sorry, Carl has to write the story, but he can't think of how to get started. He ends up daydreaming about himself in his current situation, worried about what to write for his homework, and coming up with this daydream about a TV station for aliens, which is quite an inventive, imaginative end to the story. I just wanted to mention, I like how this starts students off, because at this level, they are more familiar with situations they know well, like their house or their school, you know, watching television with family members and so forth. So I like how it starts in a familiar setting and then develops off in a more imaginative way, which is a really good place for students to start gathering ideas if they have trouble. And then we go on to look at the question again, I don't know what to write, and students are asked if they ever feel like that when they have to write a composition or story or a poem. So they're putting themselves into Carl's shoes and thinking about themselves. And then with this green icon, this pair or two people icon you can see, which is the talking icon, students are paired or grouped together to look at these ideas and discuss which of the following would help them and to put them in order. So this is where the critical thinking comes in now. Students have to think about how they learn and what methods might help them solve problems. And when they're asked to think about if they ever feel like Carl, I think that's quite a nice emotional intelligence aspect, but also the fact that they are given solutions to help them, which they can take ownership of and consider how valuable they are, is really useful. And I think I developed this by asking students to add suggestions of their own ideas for gathering writing ideas, which they could try out in future writing tasks. So what they're doing here is starting to use critical thinking to identify a problem they may have and to think of their own ways to address this problem, which would help them. And why I started talking about writing was that at the end of this unit, the writing task asks students to write a creative story. So they've got a chance now to try out some of these techniques they identified in the speaking and listening task. So it's a really nice holistic approach to the unit that develops several competencies in a way that are accessible to students and that they can build upon in their own learning. Number 4, collaboration, as we've mentioned a few times, very valuable competency that we use a lot in language arts. So students work interdependently in a variety of different situations and with different people. So for this one, I wanted to look at a more extended task. So we have a writing project task for you to look at. This is from Standard 4. This is quite a meaty task, as you can see, there's lots of elements to it. And students are expected to collaborate in several extended and different ways to produce different outcomes. And I wanted to pick up on a project because we have a few of the project tasks in the lower and upper and middle division, books. And they can be challenging, both for students and I think for teachers, myself included, because you have to manage a series of tasks with a lot of groups who may be on different stages of their learning or of producing their outcomes all at once. However, it can be very rewarding for students because they need to work in different ways, which is something they can really learn from. And they can often surprise themselves, I think, but what they're able to do and even take control of in these situations. And I think they can also result in some really exciting and different outcomes. So I find them rewarding by the end. So when you'll come across these, there are lots of teacher notes in the guides for you to break these tasks down, which I'd highly recommend you looking at. But to take it back to collaboration, we've got lots of opportunities here. To start with, students could be asked to work in different groups. You could even allocate roles or responsibilities within a group. So one person's responsible for being the scribe, for example. One person's responsible for presenting anything verbally that they choose to present, or for researching different aspects of the project. Which can be very valuable. You just need to make sure that students are actively engaged on all the tasks, as well as especially the one they're responsible for. So working through these tasks in order from number 1 to number 5. Task 1 sees the students need to make a decision together. So already they're collaborating on deciding what they'd like their whole project to be about. Task 2 then asks them to brainstorm, which allows them all to contribute to a group task and builds on each other's suggestions. So there's lots of ideas that can be shared there. And I find with brainstorming in groups, it can be a very valuable way of starting a student off with maybe one idea which they might have had trouble thinking of themselves, and then bouncing on that, and they can develop that and really have a strong input that they would not have been able to have if they were working alone. Tasks 3 and 4 then let the students take responsibility for part of the group outcome, which they need to report back to their group on and produce something for. So this is nice because it gives them the opportunity to learn from others, to see what they're doing and again build on their ideas, and even to contribute to the learning of others. So some students might naturally find themselves a bit more expert at some of the tasks of others and are able to help the others, which is really useful. And then finally, the group collaborates on collating their work together into a cohesive project. So anything that doesn't quite work can be sorted out and adapted and revised as part of a group to come out with one cohesive project. You might even allow some groups or some students to be involved in managing their own time and their own workloads, although you might want to give suggestions for this, and you may indeed need to work with specific groups more closely than others. But that can be very powerful of giving them ownership too. So you could say by the end of a lesson, you need to produce these outcomes, and they would be responsible of how they use their time within the lesson and who worked on what. So it's a nice way of giving them ownership of the tasks while collaborating. I might want to develop this further by asking groups to collaborate to give feedback on the other groups. Perhaps if they looked at their project or if they presented their project, each group could collaborate on giving some assessments to the other groups on what they needed to work on in the future and what they did well on. So that's a different way to collaborate, which they need to discuss and agree on within their group, which is quite an interesting approach too. So lots of ideas there for collaboration. Competency 5, multicultural appreciation. Students develop appreciation of their own and different cultures. Students understand that differences between cultures make them special and should be celebrated and respected. There's lots of great opportunities in the textbooks for these, I think. I mean, it's the ideal culture, multicultural, the ideal competency for Belize, being so multicultural, having so many diverse and exciting cultures. So this is a lovely one for us, I think, coming into and learning more about. So we have here a task from Standard 3, Unit 18. This is quite a new unit, so a lot of you might not be familiar with this one. There are several texts you could pick up on just to say for multicultural appreciation. We have lots of traditional tales, which are great, stories from different cultures within Belize. But I like this example. It made me think about how events in the history of countries can shape cultures and countries in many ways. So I've chosen this example for that reason. So we have a reading task here, and we have a report written by a girl from called Lydia, excuse me. It's this report she wrote for school, but it's based on this family trip to the Serpent Sugar Mill. So written from the point of view of a student who's been to this historic site. There's lots of information in it about the site and what can be found there at this time, but it also brings up several topics you could explore, such as how different cultures came to Belize in the first place, what kind of work they did, how they were able to contribute to the diversity of the population, and then picking up on more historical events like the sugar industry, what it did for the economy, how it compares to the sugar industry today, perhaps, or other industries, and the sugar industry in other countries. And I thought this one could be a really useful way of picking up cross-curricular links too. I think I'd like to build on this competency by thinking of ways that students could research historical records for different people, perhaps who worked in this industry or other industries that would be relevant for your district, or to research or explore any historical cultural places of interest in their local areas. So there's lots of opportunities to look at one aspect of the Belizean culture and then compare it to ones that are more appropriate for your districts. And I think really importantly, it gives us all the opportunity to reflect on how these sites allow us to learn from the past and think about how we've grown, or if we've grown from the past actions and what they mean for the country. Next on digital literacy. Just before we start this one, as with IT in textbooks, it can be quite a challenging competency to cover or to state in textbooks, because there's such a variety of access to technology in different schools or districts. So we don't want to assume that technology is available or isn't available, but we do want to pick up on this and look for chances to develop this competency in our students and to have them pick up where they might learn digitally as well as through books, or where digital learning can be more beneficial even than books if possible and if they have access to it. So for this one, our statement is students understand how using a range of digital technologies can benefit their learning and everyday lives. But I think increasingly importantly, that students are aware of how to protect themselves when using digital technology, because it's getting more and more important, let's be honest. And there are many, many ways in which people need to be protected, especially young people. So here we have a speaking and listening task again. Quite a straightforward one, actually, quite a simple and short one. As you can see, this is the whole task, but one that allows students to consider different methods of communication, how many of these might be digital, how many they use themselves, and how many, for example, their grandparents might use and why that is. It could be used to discuss as the basis of discussion of the pros and cons of different types of communication, digital or non-digital, and how it's important to consider, I think, who you're writing to and why. So thinking about your audience and the purpose of your writing and which is most appropriate. And then again, I would definitely pick up safety and communicating online here. So I really be strict about the differences between communicating with family and friends and being able to share with them, but in a safe way through using digital technology, and just communicating generally online, and why we should be really careful and be aware, make students aware of how they need to protect themselves, as it says. I remember when I was teaching quite a while back now, Facebook had become very popular, and even though they weren't supposed to be on it, that lots of these students were under 16 and they were accessing it. And something happened in the school where a group of students put some images and some videos of themselves on Facebook wearing their school uniform, and it was clearly obvious from the emblem that the name of the school, which is incredibly easy for people to access where the school is, and so people potentially had the name of the school and visual images of the students who were in that school, perhaps even their names. So just by that one simple step there, we've got a really valuable teaching tool of this competency that students maybe just didn't think of, and just were excited to use this technology and share this video or photograph, but that they really need to think about the impact of what they're doing and the potential dangers that these have for them. So I think it's important that for this one, even if you haven't got much access to technology or digital literacy in the school, you take advantage of any opportunities to help them develop their digital literacy, because being aware is being protected in many ways. And our last competency, also a very important one, understanding of and advocacy for sustainable human development. So students understand what sustainable development is, how they can live more sustainably, and why this is vital to the future of our planet. Another very weighty and topical competency here. And this one's from Standard 4, this example from a reading text. I'm not sure how well you can read it. It's a really lovely poem, actually, that picks up this competency really nicely and gets students thinking about it, in my opinion, in a very vivid way. So for this one, we're asking students to think, to what extent are your students aware of the effects of climate change and the importance of environmental sustainability? So they're introduced to this poem and they need to read it and think about it and answer some questions about it. But what I really like is how the book goes on to develop this competency very practically. So if you can see on the top, this is reading 1. There's a second reading passage in this unit in which a Standard 4 student is writing in her journal about what they did today, that day in school. And it's all about how someone came in, it's to talk to the class about reducing waste. It's Let's Reduce Waste week at their school. So they talk about how they can be involved in reducing waste themselves in their families, and about the importance of planting trees to combat deforestation. And this journal extract goes on to say what the class actually physically does about these things. So they do a school cleanup. Their Standard 4 class does one. In other weeks, other classes do one. And then they plan to do some tree planting themselves in the school grounds. So I really like how this introduces a big, potentially overwhelming competency to the class, but actually also gives them a really practical and achievable way of working towards this competency. Later in the unit, again, we take this holistic approach. So this is developed in the writing section of the unit. Students work in groups and they plan their own activity to help protect the environment within perhaps the school or the classroom or the community. And I think that's really lovely, because even extending that into the community in a small way can be very valuable. I know I see when I'm walking around my village sometimes groups of students, maybe they're going to the library, or maybe they're doing a litter pick, or they're going to the park, and it makes you smile to see them. And if they're doing something so positive, such as picking up litter, it makes me feel a bit ashamed that they have to do this, but it also makes me really feel how I can be more responsible for my own actions. So yeah, it's great to see. So I want to say that while this is still a huge issue, students are able to think about what they can practically do and how their actions can make a difference. And perhaps you could encourage them to take this forward by changing how you recycle in the classroom, for example, or you should make students go home and suggest things to their families or work with communities to really make a difference in this. So while these competencies can seem very big and overwhelming at first, and perhaps hard to relate to the language arts subjects, I feel that there are many ways for us to break them down and make explicit what's already integrated into the language arts series. And there are ways in which we can build upon what's introduced in the books that are appropriate for our own classrooms and our own students. Again, it's making explicit as competencies what's already there. And I hope that helps your students, and I hope that's gone some way to helping you in delivering these competencies. So you might be glad to hear I'm nearly finished talking. We're on the last slide. I want to just give you the chance to ask any more questions you might have. Again, if you've thought of any other ways you deliver competencies that you might like to share, that would be amazing. So I'm going to bring up the chat feature again, and we'll have a look at anything else you might have to say.
Judith, I don't know if you can see the Q&A. There's a Q&A button there. Somebody asked, I can read it for you if you'd like.
Okay, I can stop sharing and look at it, but if you can read it, that would be great.
I'll read it.
Okay,
that would
thank
probably
you.
be better. It's Domingo Salam says, what are some teaching strategies that we can employ in our lesson? Do you have video clips that can help in our teaching to help students learn the concepts? This was asked about 40 minutes ago, so just letting you know that it was asked a while ago.
Great question, thank you, and thanks, Chris, because I'm not able to see that right now. We don't recommend putting video clips information in the textbooks. I think there are a few in the teacher guides, but they're ones we can be really sure are safe and will remain online. So they tend to be the ones, the BBC bite size ones and things like that. But I know I use them a lot in my teaching. And in fact, when I was researching of what I'd be doing in the middle division workshop, that the face-to-face one that I'll be doing in March, I was trying to find a few examples. So it's a great way of showing the competencies, but it's not something we tend to do in textbooks, partly because some of them often have links or pop-ups that aren't appropriate, and partly because we never know if the links will still work in, say, a year's time. So it's not something we often do in textbooks. I'll just have a look back at the chat then, if there's nothing else about the Q&A. Let me find where I was. So Renando, thanks for your comment. I enjoyed using the revised language tree for standard 4. Hopefully that means you've got your books, which is amazing. And you notice they've added more concepts from the language arts curriculum. Great. Yeah, and we really tried hard to get in more Belizean appropriate content. Green book, which is also wonderful. I think it's always great to hear that you're using these books and that you find them useful. It was very exciting for me, and I won't even get to use them. Oh, good. Thank you, Magda. That's great to hear they're more resourceful and workable. That's amazing. I'm going to share this with Leonie and Julia because they'll be delighted. Thank you. Oh, wonderful.
Hi, Judith.
So, hi.
We've got a couple of people with their hands up. I'm able to allow their mics for their audio. Would you like me to do that for the ones that have got their hands up?
Amazing. Thank you.
Delphina, if you'd like to speak, you're able to. You have to unmute yourself, but I've allowed you to speak if you'd like to. Not sure that's going to work. Maybe we'll just stick with the chat.
Okay. Actually, if I stop sharing, I'll hopefully be able to see. Is there any other written questions in the Q&A or? anything else I could look at?
No others that I can see at the moment.
Okay. Alice, then a few questions I've seen in the chat. People are wondering if the books would be available as PDFs, and I don't know the answer to that.
I'll need to find the answer to that out, and find out from the ministry what the agreement is, what's being uploaded onto the TLI. Hopefully everyone should have their physical books soon.
Absolutely, thanks, Alice. And I don't know if you know this either, or if we'll have to ask someone from the ministry, but where exactly are the teacher guides and the online tests on the TLI? Do you know?
Again, I don't know. I know that the files have been shared with the ministry and then uploaded onto the TLI. So the exact location of them, I'm not sure, but we'll be able to find that information out and share that with everyone that's attended the webinar.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks, Alice. Any other questions? Oops, lost the chat. Claudette, it says you have a question, but I can't see a question. So if you could put it in the chat, that would be amazing if you still want to. Just keep doing that. Okay, so Claudette, you received 11 books for your whole class. 16. So yeah, I'm not sure how it works with how many books are sent, sorry. Again, it might be something, Alice, is it possible we ask the ministry about that, or okay, 11 books for 16 students, or is that something that's just that the ministry is in charge of?
Yeah, the ministry is in charge of distributing the books across the school. So if you get in touch with your principal, and you'd be able to discuss that with them.
Great, thank you, Alice. I hope that helps answer the question somewhat, Claudette. Algrita, thank you for your comment, for sharing valuable information. That's great. I hope you have found some of what I've said useful. Thanks, Janita. And thank you all for attending. I'd just like to say, I really do hope this has been helpful to give you an introduction. It has been quite brief, but hopefully it will I've given you an introduction on how the books deliver the competency-based curriculum, and to give you a few examples of how you can deliver the full curriculum through the activities. So as you can see on the screen, I'd love you to try these out in the classroom. Even if you're not using the books yet, maybe you can pick something from this webinar, take a screenshot and give it a go and see what you think of it and how your students respond. And I'd love to get your feedback on that. If you're able to come in March, that would be amazing. If you're not, and you know someone who is coming, feel free to send your feedback or your questions with them, and I'd be happy to answer as many as possible. So I'll just have one more look at the chat. If there's nothing else, then should we finish up? If I stop sharing my screen a moment, I can see if there's anything else. Just me again. How's that? Oh, let's just look at the chat. I think I've picked up everything.
I think you have. Thank you so much, Judith. That was a really great session. I hope everyone found that really very informative, and lots of takeaways as well. So the recording of this will be available for you to share with your colleagues. We'll share the link to be uploaded onto the TLI as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks everyone so much for your time, and I hope to see you soon. Enjoy your books.
Thank you all for today.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Alice.
Great. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.